your organization, where you're dialing in from. For some of us, it's evening, some of us it's morning, some of us it's midday. So we're kind of all coming in from different places. All right, David, if I could ask you please to advance to the next slide. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off while people are dialing in. So welcome. Thank you for joining us on our second webinar in our series of 4 calls. This series is called Student Support, powered by artificial and human intelligence. Today, we're going to focus on meaningful data use to optimize student experience and support. I'm going to tell you a little bit more in just a moment about what that means. And of course, our presenters are going to be sharing specifically that data use relative to the use of artificial intelligence and human advising. David, you can go to the next slide, please. So my name is Karen Zaribi. I'm the founder of Shift, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Hybrid Advising Co-op. We are a coalition or collaborative of these organizations listed here. 5 organizations, working to improve post-secondary access and success for students, especially those farthest from opportunity. We have Bottom Line, College Advising Corps, KIP, Let's Get Ready, and One Goal. And I will note that at some points today, you might hear our speakers refer to the Hybrid Advising Co-op as Block. And that was a name that was affectionately named by the community for Bottom Line, Let's Get Ready, One Goal, College Advising Corps, and KIP, made into a nice acronym of Block. So we kind of refer to ourselves under both names. And Block is supported by my organization, Shift. We have the honor of facilitating this amazing cooperative, along with our technical partner, Mainstay, who is the chatbot provider for each of these organizations. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about the Hybrid Advising Co-op today. I shared more details along with Maurice McCulley, who's the program officer from the Pathways team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who's funding this project. We shared more in webinar 1 about the Hybrid Advising Co-op. So I encourage you, if this is new to you, we do have double the number of people here today. So we might have some new people on the line. I think we had about 350 people registered today, and we had 200 registered for our last call. So we will be sending out supplemental materials to share more about who the Hybrid Advising Co-op is, what we're doing, as well as the link to the recording from the first call. David, you can go to the next slide. So just in brief, our co-op brings together these 5 organizations, and we're working with a very specific goal of learning faster together how to harness AI technology to advance student access and post-secondary success. And this is a very, very new and quickly advancing field, given how much the technology changes daily. The idea here is to bring this coalition of organizations together so they can learn faster together. And this means everything from sharing data with each other, sharing their best practices, their tools, and coming together monthly and virtually monthly and in person twice a year. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question now. On our last call, we asked, what is your organization's current use of AI? And I want to just qualify here specifically with advising. And we'd like to ask that question again, because like I said, we do have, I think, a lot of new folks on the call today. And so we're just going to do a quick poll. And I wonder, and I'm curious to see what the answers will look like. You can see what the responses were from the last call, which is kind of interesting. It's a nice kind of adopter curve. And we have a lot of folks that were kind of on the periphery thinking about artificial intelligence, maybe exploring the area and starting piloting. So it was kind of an interesting mix on our last call, and I'd like to learn from you about where you are. So go ahead and this is not a very scientific poll, just pick the response that best corresponds with your organization. I'll just give it a minute, and then David will show us the poll results, assuming Zoom plays nicely with us.
Oh.
Great. One more minute. If you haven't responded yet, please go ahead. Those of you in the co-op, of course, please, you are welcome to respond too. This is your call. David, how are we doing? Are we ready to show the results? All right, so it looks like we have some interesting results here. So 33% are, I would imagine you're on this call probably because it's something you're thinking about and you're curious. Then a nice split here, almost even between exploring, so maybe actively kind of looking into options, and then split with experimenting and actively piloting. And we have 19% who are implementing or have implemented, and which is slightly higher than our last call. So terrific. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's super interesting. And if you want to add any notes in the chat box about how you're using AI technology, we would love to hear more details about your work. Any web links, that kind of thing. These chat log will be sent out afterwards to all the participants. So I'm just going to quickly recap our first call because I think this is important framing for each of our calls as we go into each of the themes that we're going to talk about. On our first call, we talked about design choices for hybrid advising, and there was a key point that came up that it's really not a one-size-fits-all. So as we think about hybrid advising, it's the integration of AI-enabled chatbots into a human advisor model. That's what we're calling a hybrid advising model. So it's really the integration of these things. And it's not like there's one right formula here. So, some organizations are much heavier on the advisor forward model. So where that finger is over here on the right in the animation, and other organizations are way further on the bot forward model, which helps to reach a larger student population. And again, it really depends on the circumstances and the goals of each organization. What is the right model? And I encourage you to listen to that first webinar because we go into that topic a little bit deeper. We had Tim Rennick from Georgia State University, Stephen Colon from Bottom Line, and Lena Eberhardt from Let's Get Ready share their different models, which contrast with each other. David, if you can go to the next slide. The key point here, though, is that there is not a one-size-fits-all. So, and I think this quote from Lena really summarizes this really nicely. This was from the Q&A session on the first webinar that, and I'll just read the second part of it. It's about knowing who you are and making sure the tools really help you to do the thing that you do best. So when you hear our speakers present today, you'll hear that they have really different models from each other. And in the co-op, we actually valued that because it gave us the opportunity to learn from different perspectives and how to use this AI-enabled chatbot technology to help different strategies. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I will just quickly, we have an amazing panel of speakers today, and I'm going to just quickly share our agenda in a moment. And I will introduce each speaker as actually right before their talk. So I'm not going to do it right now, but you can see we have speakers from Washington Student Achievement Council, MDRC, One Goal, and CAC. So we have an amazing array of perspectives, and we'll be sharing a little bit more detail about each speaker. We introduce them. So very quick overview. So we are doing what we're calling learning spotlights. If you were with us on our first call, the format's going to be different this time. We're going to be doing very short spotlights on each organization. The first spotlight will be WASAC, Washington Student Achievement Council, and MDRC, followed by One Goal, College Advising Corps. There will be a brief Q&A at the end of each one because we want to give you the opportunity to ask your questions. So please, as we're talking, type your questions in. Feel free to upvote questions. I love that Zoom has added the like feature. So upvote questions. So that'll help us to triage questions for our speakers. Mike Miotti from WASAC will conclude. He'll start us and then he'll conclude at the end, talking about a vision for a statewide approach. And then Maurice McCauley will moderate a community Q&A. So we'll be triaging your questions throughout, and we really want to make sure that we get to the questions that are most important to you. And then I will close us off today with some closing reflections. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead here. I think we just introduced the speakers, and David, if you don't mind going. So we're going to hear from Washington Student Achievement Council first. Mike Miotti will be sharing the work in Washington State. So as you think about that sliding scale, this is very much a chatbot forward initiative with the OtterBot. I love that each chatbot has its name. This is the OtterBot, very appropriate for Washington State. Mike was appointed by Governor Jay Inslee in 2016, and WASAC agency oversees the multiple pathways for students, and as part of these efforts implemented the OtterBot to help students in their pathways. Following Mike will be Erica Lundquist, Senior Research Associate from MDRC, who leads their part of the research with the Otters Project in Washington State. And Erica is presenting along with Britt Henderson, Research Associate from MDRC, who specializes in using the data science approach to inform policy and programs across education, criminal justice, education, and youth development. So I'm really thrilled to learn from the three of you today, and I'm going to hand over to Mike to kick us off. And I believe we're going off screen. I think we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from you.
Thank you, Karen. I'm Mike Miotti, and I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Student Achievement Council. We are a state agency. We're the state's higher education agency, and it's a little bit of a different world. Many of you may not know exactly what that means, and it means different things in different states. We're not like the K-12 world, in which if I say I'm the chief state school officer, people involved, or I'm from the state education agency, the federal government's put a nice structure around that for many years. We're what's called a coordinating board in our world. There's about half the states have them. They do a variety of things around higher education issues of all sorts. And we're a little bit different, but not unique, in the sense that first, we're one of the larger coordinating boards in the country. So we're probably in the top 3 or 4 in terms of number of staff. We also run all the state financial aid programs in a state that has a very generous need-based grant program. For context, all of the work we're doing here is connected to our Washington College Grant and our college-bound scholarships, which together we give more grant aid to Washington residents attending Washington public and private institutions than there are total Pell Grants going to the same population. So we like to say we are the senior partner in the state-federal partnership in affordability in the state of Washington. We got into using the AI-based chatbot tool, which our name for it is OtterBot. It grows out of our college-bound scholarship, which has been around for over a decade. Our anchor need-based grant program, Washington College Grant, covers recent high school graduates and adults. There's no age restrictions whatsoever. College-bound is a more sort of traditional kind of state effort at a promise program, if you will. You have to use it when the year of graduation from high school. We enroll all 7th and 8th grade students across the state who are in the free and reduced price lunch population in high schools and middle schools. And then we try to stay with them through to 12th grade, at which point they would have to fill out a FAFSA and apply to colleges and go on, and the aid is awarded to them by the campus. That gives us the extraordinary resource of having this, student level database with some contact information and also some GPA information, because that's an element of the college bound scholarship. And so we've been emailing these students for years with almost no meaningful levels of engagement. We wanted to try to connect to them in the medium of choice of this age group, which is texting, not email. And so that's why several years ago, we launched OtterBot with Mainstay. We first did 12th graders only. We've extended to 11th grade and a bit lower, and also including parents. It is direct to student, and it's from us. It is not mediated necessarily. We do have a few emerging partnerships with high schools, which we connect to, but it's just not really, it's really more about, we're just reaching out to everybody in our database that we have a cell phone number for, which is ballpark 15,000 students plus a year, and has been growing since we launched it. And we have become a partner with MDRC in better understanding just what's going on here with the OtterBot tool, because we saw right away very easily that there was extraordinary levels of student engagement, that just dwarfed anything you can get out of email or any other ability to communicate with these students. What we don't know, though, is what impact that's having. So the project is both an opportunity to understand, is OtterBot helping students who otherwise might not be considering college? Is it getting results in expanding college going? And also, we're working with MDRC in order to be, say, adaptive and ever evolving in how to best make this work. Because in these kind of efforts, frequently government and other sectors will just roll something out and it's kind of static as to what they do for years. We would love to, we're doing A/B testing and other types of things to see if we can optimize our work on an ongoing basis. And at that point, do I turn it over to Eric and Britt, or do you want to take it over from me, Karen?
I believe Erica is going to pick up from here, and we're going to share slides. And thank you so much for kicking us off, Mike.
You're
very
welcome.
exciting to hear about all of the uses of the OtterBot.
I'll get started. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Erica Lundquist. I'm from MDRC, and I'm the project director for the Otters project. And I'm going to kick off our discussion of this project. As has been mentioned, WASAC and MDRC have been collaborating on the Otters project, and this work is funded by Capital One. So I'm going to start by giving you a quick overview of the Otters project. In the field of program evaluation, a lot of evaluations of promising interventions find that these interventions fail to achieve the desired impacts. This can happen for a number of reasons, such as the intervention is neglecting to address an important barrier, or not enough people are taking advantage of the intervention services. Therefore, we strongly believe it's important to use data to optimize interventions to make them as effective as possible. In the 2022-2023 school year, we conducted phase 1 of the Otters study. The key goals of phase 1 were to understand how students are engaging with OtterBot, to understand student needs, reactions to OtterBot, and perceived barriers to college, and to learn how OtterBot can be more effective in helping students receive financial aid and access to education and training opportunities after high school. To learn more about these issues, we engaged in several data collection and analysis activities, including a discovery process, which included things like process mapping and journey mapping, which helped highlight how complicated the process for obtaining financial aid and enrolling in post-secondary education is. It also highlighted several places where people could drop the ball if they don't have the right information. And these are places where OtterBot is really well suited to help. This is especially important for students who don't have parents who attended post-secondary education at all or in this country, and therefore might be at a knowledge disadvantage. Phase 1 also included quantitative analysis of administrative data, focus groups, and a survey, which my colleague Britt is going to talk more about soon. But before I hand it over to Britt, I wanted to mention that we are currently in phase 2 of the Otters project, which is about using insights from phase 1 to modify the OtterBot messages to try to make them more effective. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So the last thing I just wanted to mention right now is that this presentation is focused on a subset of the Otters project, and that is findings and messaging changes, particularly focused on Hispanic students. The Otters project in total is not limited to Hispanic students, but we thought focusing on findings and actions related to this subpopulation would present an interesting example for how to use data to optimize an intervention. So with that, I'll turn it over to Britt.
Great, thank you, Erica. On the next slide. All right, thank you. So we started off with administrative data analysis. We had data on college-bound students, demographics, messaging data, financial aid completion info, and post-secondary enrollment. In terms of methods, we started off with very simple descriptive statistics, and then included some logistic regressions and random forest modeling to identify which student characteristics were associated with our key outcomes, which were financial aid completion and college enrollment. Based on this administrative data analysis, we found that Hispanic students represent an important opportunity for OtterBot to address disparities in college going. Hispanic students made up almost half of students in the College-Bound Scholars Program, though they make up only 23% of students in Washington high schools overall. Thus, they are overrepresented in the CBS program. Additionally, Hispanic CBS students had lower rates of financial aid completion and college enrollment compared to other racial and ethnic groups. And this was especially true compared to Black and Asian CBS students who had the highest rates of these outcomes. On the next slide, so based on these findings from the administrative data, we wanted to hear more from the students themselves. So we conducted 15 focus groups with students and with parents across 7 high schools. The team spoke to approximately 120 students and 28 parents or guardians. Goals of the focus groups included gauging student familiarity with OtterBot, gauging interest in receiving information about college and financial aid from OtterBot, assessing students' perceptions and expectations of bots more generally, and involving students in co-creation and improvement of messaging design and outreach strategy. One major finding that came out of the focus groups was that many Spanish-speaking students and parents who receive OtterBot messages were not aware of the option to receive these messages in Spanish, or if they were aware, they found the process of switching to Spanish to be a burden. Okay, next slide. So our focus groups highlighted some additional areas in which we wanted more information about CBS students. So in the spring of last year, we filled out a survey to senior CBS students who are 18 or older. The survey asked questions on post-secondary aspirations and familiarity with financial aid and OtterBot, among other topics. We received 662 responses, and we noticed right away that most of the respondents identify as Hispanic. They made up about 81% of that respondent pool. So based on this, we decided to do a sub-analysis of only Hispanic respondents. And the slide shows some of the findings from that sub-analysis. So we think that respondents likely represent a high-achieving and more engaged subgroup of students, because 87% plan to attend a 2 or 4 year college after graduation, and 89% respondents had already submitted their financial aid application at the time of the survey. And that compares to only about 40% of CBS students overall. 91% of these respondents said financial considerations such as affording tuition and fees impacted their decision to pursue higher education. They also named working and staying close to home as major considerations in their decision. 84% of respondents indicated that they had heard of the College-Bound Scholarship Program, but many students were unsure what it covered. Most were not able to correctly identify that it covers tuition at public college rates, covers some fees, and includes a small book allowance. 85% of respondents said additional information on scholarships and other types of financial aid would be either extremely or very helpful. Finally, out of Hispanic respondents who had received OtterBot messages, 82% indicated that the messages from OtterBot had encouraged them to take one or more actions, such as completing a financial aid application, applying to college, a training program, or an apprenticeship program, reaching out to a counselor, teacher, or other staff member, or researching different schools or training programs. All right, and now I will pass it back to Erica.
Great, thank you. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, we are currently in phase 2 of the project, which is about optimizing OtterBot based on the findings from phase 1. So based on the findings that Britt just discussed, we've made the following changes this year. So first, we included an extra step in the process to make sure automatic translations into Spanish were reviewed and messages were tweaked as needed. We also sent instructions for switching to Spanish in several of the first messages. We tested and improved the process of switching from English to Spanish and back again. Another thing we did was for a key infographic that we developed for the project, we made sure it had high quality translation and was well formatted after translation, and we encouraged students to share this with their parents. And finally, we included reminders that SSN is not needed for parents and immigration status of parents is not a factor for financial aid eligibility. So we're hoping that all of these tweaks make OtterBot a little more useful for Hispanic students and their parents, and also make these families feel like these messages are for them and not like they are an afterthought. So the last thing I wanted to mention quickly is that we are planning to put out a toolkit this year with key tools we have used on the Otters project, including things like survey instruments, focus group protocols, and some key code from the project. So we really hope that this will be a useful resource for organizations interested in doing this kind of work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you to Mike and Erica and Britt. Really appreciate you sharing this this wider vision for OtterBot, and then also, you know, how you are using research and data to optimize the experience with OtterBot. I confess I have lost the questions here, so I'm going to ask Maurice to jump in on the Q&A, and I may need Maurice or Ellen or Shay to jump in and to queue up a question.
Yeah, happy to do so. Hi, everyone. So I don't see any in the chat, but if you have one, please feel free to drop it in. Erica and Britt, I think it could be helpful if you could just spend a little bit of time talking about, based on findings you found and working with WASAC, what was sort of like the time around sort of like getting the data that informed changes that you're making? And given that we may have people on the call that are in different sort of maturity stages of using chatbots or considering doing it, or setting up pilots, what sort of advice would you give around best practices for taking data to inform sort of like next stage processing? I just think that would be helpful.
Do you want to tackle that, Britt, or you want me to? I can say a little bit about like surveys and focus groups. And actually, another thing we've started doing in phase 2, which I think has been really, really great, is we're doing as we're kind of rolling out the messages for phase 1, we're doing user testing of the phase 1, as we start rolling out the messages for phase 2, we're doing user testing of phase 2. So we've kind of found a group of students that are willing to kind of give feedback on the messages before we put them out there. So I think, you know, there's a lot of different scope when it comes to kind of data collection of surveys or focus groups or user testing. You can do a really big, rigorous effort, or you could do something that's like pretty cheap and efficient, but it still can give you really good insight. So I I guess that's what I would say. Britt, do you have anything about like kind of the administrative data that you think is useful to add?
Yeah, I think when we started out, we had a lot of conversations between WASAC and also Mainstay, just talking about the specifics of what was available in the data and thinking about the types of data that we needed for our analyses. And I would say doing that early on and really pinning down what you need, what you're hoping for is important, because there's so much data that you can easily get lost in it and go down a rabbit hole. But just kind of knowing like what your key questions are that you're after so that you're not just spinning. And then really simply just getting that data in the same format every time for efficiency, pinning down what you want that structure to look like early on and continuing with that structure. I would also add that simple analyses are really valuable. So we were lucky in that we had funding and we could layer on, like we started simple with basic descriptive statistics, and then we could layer on more complex analyses, and we were fortunate that we had the funding to do that. But if you don't have a ton of funding, you can get a ton of valuable insights just by starting with very simple analyses. Like basic descriptive statistics can tell you a lot. Even from the analyses that I showed earlier, these weren't super complex. It's just looking at disaggregating data by key subpopulations can really help you understand who you're serving and what are any gaps that may be coming up. So yeah, I would say start small and try to iterate.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you both for those responses. We will have more time for Q&A. So if you think of something for MDRC later on, we'll have another section for that. But for the sake of time, we want to make sure we skip to the next presentation. But please feel free to utilize the chat, and I'm going to go over to Karen.
Thank you, Maurice. Looking forward to digging into more questions shortly. And like Maurice said, please do jump into the chat and share any reflections about how you use data to optimize student experience. Well, I'm thrilled to introduce the mighty team from One Goal. We have with us today Kate Sweetman, who is the VP of Technology. She is responsible for data and technology integration. So perfect for this hybrid advising co-op. We have Zach Marks-Quo as well, who has led the incorporation of student support systems in high school graduates in Houston. Everything from culturally responsive curriculum to this project with hybrid advising model. And last and certainly not least, Haisu Q, who guides the vision for digital advising tools at One Goal and has a decade of experience in post-secondary support and digital marketing. And we're just thrilled to have you share today your experience using data to drive your hybrid advising model and how you've kind of co-created this model with your advisors and students. I think I'm handing over to Kate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. And I want to start off by saying it is great to see so many friendly faces on the Zoom. There's folks from across our whole industry here. And so thanks so much for being here today. You can go to my next slide. So I wanted to make sure that everybody could ground real quick and the following slide in One Goal's mission, why we're here. We're an organization that leads the movement to transform post-secondary advising and support. And if you go to the next slide, when I joined One Goal about 2.5 years ago, we were in the pandemic, and I think like many of you, the pandemic changed our level of urgency around incorporating digital tools and figuring out how to be a little bit more digital first. And so we took a moment to think about how do we want our organization to incorporate technology while we were kind of running right into it. And so we came up with a few tenets on how we wanted to make sure we thought about right away and for the long term incorporating tech. We wanted to make sure that One Goal was using technology to really simplify administrative tasks. We wanted to make sure we're still amplifying the human connection, though. We also wanted to make sure that we weren't turning ourselves into an ed tech place. We are a human first, relationships first org. And we wanted to be careful about mission drift. I know that's something that a lot of folks here worry about. And so we wanted to stay on task. And one of the ways we figured we would stay close to our work was trying to make sure that technology would always be leveraging OneGoal's unique expertise. What do we bring to advising? How can we make sure that our advisors are taking what they know best and talking to our students directly and having the computers take care of everything else? And so if you go to the next slide, please. We, a few years ago, really our post-secondary advising looked like manual text messages sometimes, emails, live advising sessions, some Zoom advising sessions. Right now, we are piloting in 2 of our 6 regions and planning for some pretty big org-wide expansion on taking a model that puts a chatbot first and an advisor hand in hand next to give great advising sessions to our students in post-secondary. And so Zach is going to take you through what that looks like in one of our regions and how even in the design of the program, we really tried to make sure that we were putting our humans, our users, our relationships first, and then supporting them with great technology. And so Zach, you can take it away.
Great, thank you, Kate. We can go to the next slide. So I'm based in our Houston office for OneGoal, and like Erica and Britt described, we do some of the similar things with asking students for their feedback on some of the messages that we want to send out. Does this sound like something you'd want to read? Does it sound like something a young person would want to read? But we've also brought in some of our students and advisors when we've had to make really big decisions around the chatbot. So when we launched, we went to our students and asked them, hey, how frequently would you like to get messages? Like Kate described on the previous slide, we did some intermittent texting with students here and there, but it wasn't really consistent. We weren't getting really great results. And so we were a little bit hesitant to kind of jump in and send regular messages to students. We were initially thinking, hey, let's send students messages maybe once a week, see what the responses are like. But actually going to students for this pretty big decision in our eyes, they told us, hey, we'd like to get messages like 2 to 3 times a week. And they assured us, even if they aren't responding to messages every time, they're reading them, and they're a good reminder and relationship builder. That getting that message kind of says, hey, like, remember OneGoal, we're here for you. You can text us when you have questions. And so they said that they really appreciate that, even if they're not always responding to the questions that we're asking them. Another really big decision point that we had was what model we wanted to choose. So right at the beginning, we saw that really nice graphic with the lever on, is this going to be a bot first model or an advisor first model? And so we actually took that question to our advisors. They were going to be the ones that would be implementing the chatbot with our students and the ones that would be most affected by the model. And so we took all of our learnings from some of the other organizations in the collaborative. We laid out, hey, these are the pros and cons for us of the bot first model. These are the pros and cons of the advisor first model. Here's what we're thinking, but we asked our advisors here in Houston, what would you like to do? How do you want to pilot this? And they are the ones that also, alongside with our recommendations, said, let's try this bot first model. Let's see how it goes. And so that was really effective for us, not only to bring their voice in, but it made sure that the advisors were really clear on the model before we even implemented it, because we shared with them, this is what it could look like. And so it had that, I think it really supported that buy-in from them as well, in addition to just being really clear on what the model was for them. So those are just some examples of ways that we've used qualitative data specifically at the launch. And I'm going to pass it to Haisu, who on the next slide will be talking about our use of quantitative data.
Thanks, Zach. Hi, everyone. I am Haisu, and I work for OneGoal, specifically on our national team. So like Zach stated, in addition to the qualitative data, we use quantitative data to provide differentiated support for our students, no matter where they are in their journey. And we also use the data we collect to form our advisors when they are supporting their students. The first way that we use data is that we collect NSC data and then we add that into our Salesforce. With that, we have a mainstay and Salesforce integration. What that means is that it allows us to automatically sync certain fields. And then with this sync, it allows us to create different audiences and send out personalized text messages based on their journey. So what all of that means is basically, if we know that say a large number of our students are attending a certain school, we will send out personalized messages related to that school for our students. So letting them know like, hey, registration is happening here. Have you done your registration yet? And then the second way that we use data is that we use mainstay to collect data directly from students. So we'll ask students questions, and the answers that we get from students, we are able to save their responses. And depending on the type of question, the answers or response we get, we might want to also sync that back to Salesforce. So for example, if we don't have enrollment information for that student, we'll ask them, hey, which school are you attending? They send that they share that information with us, and then we'll be able to capture it and then sync it back to Salesforce. With this approach, it really allows us to save time, and then it also provides more data for our advisors when they are prioritizing their caseloads. Next slide, please. So since our pilot with the Houston region, we have some initial exciting insights. In this slide, it's showing us that there is a 17% increase of likelihood of our students to report their FAFSA completion compared to those that are not in the pilot. So that's huge. That's a big number, and it's really exciting for us. And since this is initial learning, we really can't say that the chatbot helps students complete FAFSA yet. But what we can say is that we have more data about our students that can help inform our advisors when they are supporting them. And as we are going into our implementation phase, we will continue to explore more and look at the impact of our chatbot with our additional regions. And that is it for us.
Yeah, thank you, One Goal team. Really appreciate seeing how that looks in your pilot implementation phase. We did have a question in the chat that I see Zach responded to, but I think it's still good to voice it over if there's additional input someone from the team wants to add. Andrea, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, how are you measuring student response rate success with the bot, knowing students prefer more messages, but might not necessarily respond? So we'll give you all a few minutes to respond to that.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit more detail to the chat and then pass it to anyone else if they want to add. But yeah, one of the things that this collaborative that we've all done and has really pushed us to do and support us with is asking this question pretty regularly. So asking them, have you taken any action based on my messages? And then which ones? And we will change the potential responses. It'll be like A, B, C, D. And we'll change them based on the messages that we sent out. So if that's in the past few months, if we sent a message about, hey, this is what office hours are, this is what you can do at office hours, and this is how to find your professor's office hours, that'll be one of the options. And then students will check that if that's one of the things that they've done. So that can also kind of tell us which messages maybe students are being to, which topics are more popular. And yeah, I'll pass it to Haisu if she wants to add anything.
Yeah, thanks, Zach, for sharing that. I think in addition to monitoring the engagement rate and see like how some of the certain interactive messages perform, I think another thing we'll monitor is the opt-out rate. And that was something that was part of our first initial testing, where when we were increasing the number of text messages we send out to students, we were also looking at our opt-out rate, and we also noticed that actually the more text messages we sent out, the opt-out rate has stayed consistent and we didn't really see any decline. So that was an indicator for us that it was all right for us to continue the frequency of the text messages we sent out.
Great, thank you both. We had some more come in. We are taking note of those questions. We'll make sure to resurface them at the Q&A, but I'm going to pass it over to Karen to introduce our next slide.
Thank you, Maurice, and thank you to the One Goal team for sharing your experiences with the pilot and that exciting kind of hot off the press data. Maurice, thank you for moderating. It was great to have some questions come in, so please keep them coming. We are coming into our Q&A shortly, so we'll definitely want to hear from you. So I'd now like, for our last learning spotlight, I'd like to introduce Toby Kinzel, the Chief Impact Officer from College Advising Corps. Toby leads a team dedicated to accomplishing their mission, and certainly is one of the organizations that has been a real early adopter in this space of hybrid advising. And Toby has 28 years of experience in nonprofits, K-12 and higher ed. So looking forward to learning from you, Toby, about CAC's experience.
Thank you, Karen, and hello to everyone. For almost 20 years, College Advising Corps has worked to increase opportunities for students by making education beyond high school more accessible and equitable. Like many of you here today, we envision a world where students' backgrounds do not determine their destiny. Next slide, please. We do this by providing high-quality post-secondary advising to over 200,000 students across the country, located in 16 different states. This advising is delivered by over 750 near-peer advisors who are working in high-poverty high schools, led by our 33 university partners. Next slide. Through the years, CAC has scaled our in-person model while staying on the forefront of innovation. 10 years ago, we began piloting and codifying virtual and hybrid advising models. And in the last 5 years, we've been fortunate enough to build on these early innovations to pilot the use of AI-powered chatbots alongside our in-person advisors. Our advising is grounded in data-centered culture and integrated within our proprietary data and client management application called Grace, where we not only track our KPIs, but have integrated SMS texting and the chatbot so our advisors can use it as a one-stop shop, so to speak. In 2020, we were fortunate enough to partner with Common App and Mainstay to implement a groundbreaking initiative aimed at mitigating the expected impacts of COVID-19. Our advisors worked full-time as a virtual response center to answer questions the chatbot couldn't answer and provide supplemental advising services to a total of over 1.4 million students by the time the project ended in 2022. All of these really valuable learnings led us to pilot the use of chatbots alongside our advisors in schools in partnership with our chatbot contractor Mainstay, many of whom of us work with. Our chatbot is direct to student and utilizes natural language processing and machine learning to process data and deliver responses. We began this pilot in 2021, and today our chatbots are messaging 10,000 students in North Carolina, Atlanta, Texas, and Michigan, with our advisors answering, viewing, and supporting escalations, all integrated within Grace. I'm now going to share how this impact of that work and how we've leveraged the Hybrid Advising Co-op to test new ways to advance this technology. Now you can advance to the next slide, Shay. Thank you. We have seen enough evidence in our data and feedback from our students to believe most definitely that chatbots do move the needle in increasing our key performance indicators. First and foremost, our students do find the chatbot helpful. You've heard some of this data already from some of our partners, but 87% of our students said they learned something new from the chatbot, 89% believe it's helpful, and 88% of students took action as a result of a chatbot nudge. And this is from our 22-23 data. But perhaps most compelling, on our next slide, you will see that we have found in the last 2 academic years that our students receiving chatbot messages have higher KPI completion rates. When comparing outcomes for students with similar ranges of GPA, so using some rigorous standards to pull out where we can see the greatest impact with like students, we found that FAFSA completion increased by 22%, college application submissions increased by 18%, and the number of advisor meetings increased by 17%. As we participated in this hybrid advising co-op, we used this data and tracking to begin to test how to use the data to better differentiate student support. Next slide. We've heard through student and advisor feedback that more targeted messages are preferred. And the more that they can be targeted to the unique context of the students, the more likely students are to engage with the chatbot and take action. So we decided to test this in our pilot by collecting data from the chatbot to categorize students in 3 different pathways: a career pathway, college, and unknown pathways. We sent a chatbot message to students asking them which pathway they intended to pursue. There's not enough room in the PowerPoint slide to give you all the options in the message, but just know that we gave them some options to select associated with a number. Based on their response, we put them into 3 different groups and crafted chatbot scripts to deliver content directed toward the pathway. We began this test in January and ran it through June, and halfway through, we invited groups to move within the pathways. We learned a few things about this. First of all, our hypothesis was right. It was interesting to students, and it did increase engagement. So we did see active engagement increase across all of these 3 groups. Second, we found that the opt-out rates decreased in the college and career groups, but increased for the unknown group. So it appeared that our targeting messaging worked, but it opened up new curiosities, and you can go to the next slide, Shay, about these students in each pathway. So we started to do a little digging. We wanted to know who these students were, and we wanted to learn more about them. So we looked at them based upon their GPAs and found some outcomes that you would probably expect. The college group had a higher percentage of students above a 2.5 GPA. Interestingly, the career group had only 35% of students below a 2.5. But what was really interesting was that the unknown group had a pretty wide variety of students that were in the group, and only 22% were below a 2.5. What we think is interesting about this group is that it aligns with other things we see, which we've got students that are in the chatbot, but they're not actively engaging, and we call them passively engaged students. So while they're paying attention to the bot, they may or may not be responding, or they may not be engaging. We do hear from them things like, I didn't respond to any of your messages, but I read every one, and it got me to do something. So this is a group we want to learn more about. What's exciting about this chatbot work, it is truly an onion. Once you start to peel back a layer, there are more layers, and there's much more for us to capture and explore in the data. So as I bring my remarks to a close, I will share the most recent tests to further advance our use of timely data in our chatbots. Our belief and the premise of our work with a hybrid advising co-op has been that the use of chatbots can make in-person advising more efficient and effective, as the bot is delivering basic information, nudging students to take action, and answering questions 24/7. This current semester, we're piloting a caseload management tool that uses data collected in the chatbot, combined with data in Grace, to sort students by level of need. We've trained a small group of advisors to use this tool and look forward to managing progress to determine if it moves the needle for students and gives them a more strategic, that is advisors, an efficient approach to advising. CAC does not follow a cohort model. This is a little bit different from our colleagues in other access programs. Our hallmark is that we serve the entire senior class. Therefore, using data to target students provides our advisors with greater efficiency in reaching students. As we move forward in our chatbot work, we want to further integrate our data application with our chatbot provider so that we may share data in real time back and forth to increase our ability to deliver targeted and timely information and use real-time data and predictive analytics to direct our advisors towards students. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Really love the work that you all are doing. We had a question in the chat around, does career pathways include students going to technical programs at community colleges? And I would add to that, to your point around just real-time data and getting better at that, how are you all thinking about students who may move between these sort of pathways that you've used to describe them and being able to respond to the real journey a student is on? Just adding that to the question that was actually in the chat.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the way that we do our advising, the career pathway was really focused more on those that are interested in the military, certificates, workforce development programs, those types of things. And we really centered our college pathways on 2 and 4 year. I will say that all 3 of those pathways, the content of the messaging had a core content that was the same. And then we refined different messages based on their content. So that's how we approached it. Maurice, to answer your question, remind me what you asked me. I just had a brain.
How are you all thinking about being able to put students in pathways, knowing they may come in and out of those sort of pathways multiple times during their advising with you all?
Thank you. That is something we definitely thought about. Some of that had to do with the timing that we tested this. So we tested it in the senior year. And so it was in the spring of the senior year. And so there was less likely to be movement during that time, although we wanted to make sure that students that were in a career pathway or the unknown had the opportunity to move to the college pathway if they wanted. So we wanted to make sure that opportunity was there, and we wanted to drive students in the unknown pathway toward a pathway. So much of our messaging was pushing them in that direction. As we move forward and we think about doing this for a full academic year, I think that's really important to give students an opportunity to have choice and not be forced to be in a group. And there's a great opportunity to use it in moving them in a direction. So particularly those students that might not know what they want to do, to use it as a way to move them in a direction so they have a post-secondary pathway.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for sharing that. Again, questions in the chat, feel free. We have a little more content to share with you all before we open up to the Q&A. So I'm going to pass it back to Karen and Mike to give us some visioning.
Thank you so much. And I hope you've enjoyed hearing about these different models across Washington State, One Goal, CAC, and certainly seeing some of the data around how students are supported through hybrid advising, as well as some of the effectiveness data that we saw from One Goal and CAC as well. I'd like to conclude here and invite Mike Miotti to share a vision for where Washington State is headed. When Mike was sharing the work earlier, was sharing very much a chatbot forward model, and share where he's seeing the integration go with the local entities like schools, kind of similar to what One Goal and CAC were describing. Mike, we're going to go off screen share here so we can just hear you speak.
Okay, thank you. I did put in the chat 2 documents that for those who want to go to broader context and what I'm about to say, they can take a look at that. First is, our work in this area needs to be understood as part of our overall effort to increase educational attainment among the Washington population. This is not just an isolated effort to increase utilization of financial aid. It fits into a broader goal. Our framework for that work to increase educational attainment has what we call strategic clusters of affordability, enrollment, completion, and student supports, and by that we mean basic needs supports for lower income and middle income families. And we have equity cross-cutting as a value and a lens in everything that we do in those areas. So this work falls under what we would call enrollment. And when we first started talking about things like this, we had some people say, well, wait a minute, that's what campuses do. Campuses enroll students, you don't. And of course we don't, states don't, right? So what we really mean is we're using the term enrollment enrollment, because that's the word people can relate to. If for the insiders and for demographers, we're talking about participation. We want to increase in total enrollment. We want to increase access across all Washington residents to higher education. And we think the state is a critical player in that, in partnership with institutions and others, because institutions, even in the aggregate, don't really drive enrollment. They have not in the second half of the 20th century or beyond. There are societal factors, and it's not even clear that a state can really affect those societal factors, but we're going to try, to do that to increase enrollment. We think providing a certain amount of what I would call digital and other infrastructure, to these efforts will be helpful. If you're, I've been around K-12 world a long time, mostly as a policy person. I'm not an educator. And if you put resources into many high schools or school districts, I think the unfortunate history in the country, broadly speaking, is that those resources tend to be drawn into resolving the crisis of the moment, or the thing that must be done this week, scheduling courses, responding to social emotional issues, being called into bus service, something like that, and it's very hard for school districts to commit to supports and resources, let alone complicated technology solutions. And then when you add in the disparity in sizes of school districts, their IT capacity, the resources, we see OtterBot as one example in which we invest in infrastructure that can go directly to students. So we've started in this bot forward way, but we want to move on and have that bot actually help people on the ground do something that is more directly connected to students. So the bot can be rebranded. We are willing to rebrand the bot for student populations that we know, based on a brand that if a school or other community said, call it EagleBot. There's this mascot thing around bots that started with Georgia State's use of PantherBot, that we're sort of going in that flow. So we're open to rebranding. We're open. We very much want to develop closer partnerships, not just with schools, but community groups and others that are youth serving organizations that are interested in fostering college going. And that includes our regional partnerships, which is the other link that I put in the chat, which we are now funding 8 community partnerships around the state, going to be expanding soon to more, in which we're trying to support partnerships that are not just educational institutions like colleges and school districts, but also others in the community, youth serving organizations, community-based nonprofits, anyone else who wants to be part of making that community more supportive of college-going opportunities for all of their residents. And we see the OtterBot, or the AI chatbot tool, as being, again, an infrastructural component that can become more relevant in a community when we have the partner help make it connect on the ground to their students better. And I think I delivered on what I was supposed to close out with.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. I hope what people were hearing and what you said is the visioning and thinking about how, if your organization is a college access org, which a lot of these orgs are, how do you plug into these larger state initiatives, and what does that mean in terms of creating a seamless journey for its student? So I really appreciate that visioning and thinking about this as a collaborative effort. I am going to move us into the open Q&A portion. I'm gonna use some moderator grace here, and I'm gonna pause a little bit and see if, just give people some time to put it in the chat if you like. Also feel free to raise your hand. I think I can see those as well. And if we don't get some questions in about a minute or so, I have some that I can throw out to the group as well. So just give you some time to collect your thoughts, and we have all the panelists here with us. So Alrighty. Some came in through the chat. That's great. Can you all still hear me? Okay, I had to move rooms, so you're seeing me do that in real time. So just a general question to kick us off, and anyone can feel free to jump in. What advice about data structure, data systems, or data collection would you give the participants who might just be getting started with designing a hybrid advising approach? And anyone feel free to jump in.
I could jump in first. For OneGo, I think one of the first consideration is to make sure to connect with your legal team early on, and making sure that you're meeting compliances, especially pertaining to storing student data. Because we have our Salesforce and Mainstay sync, the information we're going back and forth. So aligning and connecting with your legal team to make sure that you're fulfilling all of that is super, super important to even start the work. And I would say the second thing is that once we started sending out messages, we started getting data in on engagement rate. So I would say definitely make time to look at the data. So allow time for data making. And for us, we knew that from the beginning. We met with our advisors once a month to look at data to help us inform our advising, and then also help us inform our next month's campaigns as well.
And I would suggest connecting with people in agencies like mine or other entities in your home state or wherever you're working that can help you connect to data that could affect real time what you're talking to people about, because we haven't done this yet, but we have the capacity to do this because we have all the data streams. Is we get from the federal government, U.S. Department of Education, a almost real-time update on who's filing a FAFSA. So as you're doing FAFSA work in 12th grade, we have the ability, technically the ability, to communicate a different message pathway to those who haven't filed yet versus those who have. I know there's a lot going on this year, so verification may not be as much of an issue this year, but we'd also be in a position to be able to tell you more about that. We do provide that data to high schools in a data lookup tool that's refreshed weekly. We may be the only state in the country that does that. That allows you to use this. But if there's any way to bring in, truly actionable data that the student's gonna like, oh, okay, you're telling me something I haven't done that I need to do, as opposed to just constant, prescriptive messaging or suggestive messaging, I would look for those opportunities.
In addition to what Haisu and Michael shared, I would add access to phone numbers is really important, and having that information be as up to date as possible. We found that phone numbers change a lot too, and so there are many that are undeliverable, or there are other challenges. So phone numbers are really important. And Haisu mentioned staffing and data, and also I would add staff capacity to craft the messaging. We are fortunate enough with our partner Mainstay, we pay to have an additional service to have messages drafted, but we do spend a considerable amount of time looking at them, making sure they meet our context, editing them, supporting state-specific information. So once it starts, it does run by itself, but there's a considerable amount of work that goes into ensuring it's most effective.
Right. Thanks, everyone. We have had a couple questions come in through the chat. I'm going to do my best to make sure everyone gets answered, but if I skip over it, please just add it back in again. But a question came in about, are there any contrasts or thinking about how bots are most effectively used in high school versus the college context? I know that's different for each of the orgs here, But maybe we can start with one goal if you wanted to provide some. Oh, I saw Toby come off mute actually. Sorry, one goal. Good pause. Toby, do you want to kick us off on that?
Sure. Sorry about that. Yes, there are big differences. And I think the biggest one is for a college-oriented chatbot versus a college access-oriented or high school-oriented chatbot. You have a captive audience and you have a lot of motivated students and people, and you're able to control it, and you're able to control how different offices are involved. I think in the college access space, especially if you're a CBO and not a high school, I think you have different levels of access to data. You have students that have different motivations and are being served by either different groups or different people in the high school. And it's harder to capture all of that in a central place. And that's one big difference between high school and college, I think.
Yeah, to add on to Toby's answer, we find at One Goal, our primary strategy of connecting with high school students is via the relationships we have with schools. And so helping the school, as Michael was talking before, schools can have a hard time sometimes with technology or IT or things like that. And so One Goal really provides the resources to the school for the school to be able to reach out to those students best when they're in high school. Nothing beats a student walking through the door and looking at a teacher in the eye. And so we're going to make sure that we can really support those teachers in the classroom. And then the beauty of a hybrid advising approach and really chatbot first is when you don't get that student walking in the door and looking at a person in real life, and you need to connect with them while they're on many different college campuses or many different places. And so we've leaned in more on the post-secondary side than the secondary side.
And I would just add, I agree with everything that's been said. I would add, people need to think proactively going forward about the nature of the trusted messenger relationship between a college that someone chose to apply to, was accepted to, deposit, whatever, is going there, whether they like them or not. I mean, that's one environment in terms of the trusted messenger, and telling people what you need to do here at my institution, as opposed to how many high school students and their parents feel disaffected about their school environment. And so do they really view the high school as the most trusted messenger on what to do after I leave here, that you don't, as my high school, you don't even control. So there are alternatives. I'm saying I don't know what to do there, but they're clearly community-based organizations, youth development organizations, other community groups that could help you with the trusted messenger question. But I think it's one we need not to assume that every high school student feels as connected to their high school as every college student might to their college for the purposes of a chatbot.
Love that. I know we're coming up on time, but I see a couple good ones I want to get to if you all will allow me to. But when your orgs think about the human element as you scale chatbots, are you shifting any expectations or norms with your advisors? Is this fundamentally shifting their role in any way, or mostly making their pre-chatbot role more manageable and efficient? I think this is something you all are always grappling with, and I know the collaborative spent a lot of time on this. So if anyone wants to jump in and take that, and we'll repost it in the chat, because just so you all can see it.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think like the chatbot has provided for our advisors specifically, it's provided another source of information. So, they'll get their NSC polls, they'll have their surveys, the information that they gain from individual text messages or phone calls with students. But then there's also like this other source of surveys that the chatbot sends out, and there's questions that the chatbot asks. And the students sometimes, I think the students know that there can be another person on the end, but they really see that interaction primarily with the chatbot. So an advisor can also go into the information that they're getting there and say, okay, this student has completed their FAFSA, but they said they haven't registered for classes. And then they can also ask, social emotional messages. Hey, how are you doing? How has your semester been on a scale of 1 to 5? And we've noticed that students, we did an A/B test with students where a message was sent from their advisor and then from the chatbot asking the same question about just, how are you doing, social, like social emotionally, and the chatbot got more negative responses of like, hey, I'm not doing so great. The one from the advisor got more positive responses. And the theory was that students were more willing to be honest when they feel like they're just talking to a chatbot that, isn't really judging or they're not disappointing, versus, hey, I'm talking to my advisor. I want to make sure that they know, like, hey, I'm doing really good, right? So I think that's been a great value add for the advisors that they've named.
We found that too, that Zach is right on. What I'll add is that we do special training with our advisors to train them, first of all, how to use the technology of how to respond to messages and those kinds of things, but also the purpose, the use, the why, the value. We had an advisor in a training say, is it weird for me to be scared of this? I think there is some uncertainty on our advisor side, knowing that something you're not in control of is communicating with your students. So we've done some things to make sure our advisors have access to the messages that are going out and are aware of those, so that they know and are able to align with what they're talking to students about. As an organization, we're really clear we're not using chatbots to replace advisors. So we want to make sure that everyone is aware this is not replacing your role. It's meant to make it easier and to answer those easy questions, to nudge. We've, alongside the social emotional support we found beneficial with the chatbot, we also find that our students are really grateful for the nudges. We had a student once that said, I have ADHD and getting these reminders kept me on track to do what I needed to do.
Yeah, and putting back towards my practitioner hat, what I love in that question and the responses from you both is the idea that when you think about the intentionality of the design, you should be thinking about those sort of and that we intentionally designed this as a hybrid advising because we did not want to lose that human element. And I think also as we think about the advances in AI and the how do we keep up with that? How do we train people? We don't really get it ourselves. There are a lot of like considerations for how people think about their jobs, how people think about their relationships with students, how students think about how you're showing up for them. So I really appreciate those responses and that question. And I was going to go right back to you while you were talking, but I had to add that little bit in. But there was a question that I actually think could be helpful for everyone. You talked about a case management tool to help advisors differentiate supports for students. Could you tell us more about how College Advising Core uses data for this differentiation? I think they just wanted like a double click down into like some key data inputs that you all use to decide that.
Sure. We used qualities about the student, such as a first generation status, free and reduced lunch rate, GPA, some of those other factors, as well as their completion of college milestones. So whether or not they had submitted college applications, submitted a FAFSA, done any type of, met with an advisor, done any type of those KPIs that we follow to, because we know that they lead to college or pathways enrollment. So those were the different metrics, and I can in a second go and double check and copy and paste them specifically in the chat, but that was the data that we used. And then we worked with our impact and evaluation team to put some metrics behind each of those qualities in terms of priority and weighting. And then that gave a certain score for students that we then tiered them into red being needing the most support, orange, yellow, and green. And then guided our advisors around that. And there's a lot that you can say around how to tier students, which students are more important. Right now, we're just piloting the use of the tool, how it goes, and we have a lot more to learn and do around how we support our advisors in using the tool and how you prioritize students.
Thank you for sharing that. I know we're coming up on time. I love to keep a group going if I can. So I'm just going to see if there are any others. I feel like I missed it, but Aaron, I believe was the name. You had a couple questions. I want to make sure we got to all of those, but I may have missed one or so. So if you want to come off mute, if we did miss any of your questions, we're happy to do that. And this will be one of our last ones.
No, I think you got them all. Thanks so much. They were responded to in the chat, so appreciate it.
Great. See, when you work with great people, you don't have to worry about answers getting out there. Thank you all. I think we have time for one more. Okay, great. Well, I will pass it back to Karen. I think she has some closing thoughts for you all and some information about the next webinars. But I just want to say, having been in this work with these organizations, data is always sticky. It's never perfect. We all have our hesitations around it. There's a lot of promises around AI that we know require cleaner data practices, better information on students. But one thing that excites me coming out of this collaborative community is the idea of like, how do we use this to actually give students the specialized supports that we know that they need? And then how do we use this to make advisors more effective as we think about scaling high quality advising? And we know data is a critical component to that. So I really appreciate the organizations for sharing, appreciate Mike and MDRC for bringing a national, more field perspective to the work, and then being able to sort of see what that looks like on the ground with the different organizations. Karen, you did not ask for that, but I'm going to pass it back to you. You know, I always got to add in my 2 cents because I really enjoy the work that these organizations are doing.
Thank you so much, Maurice. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. My Zoom is not being kind today. I just want to jump in and say thank you as well to all of our presenters today. What we heard today was just a sliver of their experience, and to boil down such amazing experience into 8 minutes is a tall order. So please do get in touch with the presenters. And also, I just want to sequence that we will have a playbook coming out in the spring. There'll be an announcement about that playbook that the Hybrid Advising Co-op is co-authoring together, which will go into these topics in much more depth. It's very hard in a 1.5 hour webinar to really go into great depth. And certainly these organizations are deeply experienced and there's a lot to share. We would like to hear from you. What is your biggest aha from today's webinar? Please type in the chat because many of you are experienced as well, and we'd love to hear your experiences and any reflections that you have. We will be sending you a very brief survey. We use that information. It's very important to us so we can learn and improve between each webinar. We still have 2 left, so please do give us your feedback. It's very important to us. And I see, David, thank you for typing it in the chat. And we will also send the recording to this call as well as call number 1 and that survey as well. So you have all that information at your fingertips. And actually, if I could ask someone from my team to also put the recording from call 1 in the chat as well, just so it's at your fingertips. And we will also send it in the follow-up email. Join us for the next call. Again, it's 90 minutes, March 27th. We will be talking about creating powerful college and career advising content. We will have presenters from Let's Get Ready, Bottom Line, and Mainstay. So each call has a different theme and a different topic, and we hope that you'll join us again. And we do have the last call will be in April. Mike gave a beautiful lead in. The call will be focused on scale. So If you want to learn more about kind of along the lines of some of the work that Mike shared today, please join us in April as well. Thank you, and please don't be a stranger. Reach out to us with any feedback, any questions, and we will hopefully see you in March. Thank you again to all of our presenters and to Maurice for moderating our Q&A.